Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second screencast on purchasing power parity. In this screencast, we are going to focus on the relative version of purchasing power parity. The relative version of purchasing power parity, my friends, relates changes in the national price levels and exchange rates. To put it as briefly as possible, if the inflation rises in a country, it should exert a downward pressure on the value of its currency. Therefore, there is going to be an inverse relationship between national price levels and currency value. Now, this should not lead you to the simplistic belief that whenever inflation rises, the currency value depreciates and vice versa. Your approach must be holistic in the sense that the price level changes are just one amongst many other factors that determine exchange rates. And out of these many factors, the role of inflation is to depress the currency value. But if other mitigating factors are stronger, you may find that the currency is holding steady or even appreciating in spite of inflationary pressures. Anyway, for the moment, we are going to focus on relative purchasing power parity, which, as we said before, says that there is an inverse relationship between national price levels and currency value. To start with, let us denote the current exchange rate as E0 and let the exchange rate one period ahead be E1, and then we can find out the estimate for the expected exchange rate one period ahead by using this equation, where on the left hand side we have the expected exchange rate one period ahead, and on the right hand side we have a product between two items. Item number one is this item here, which is the ratio between the prices of products in the two countries, and item number two is this item here, this fraction, which is simply measuring the rate of change in inflation in both countries. This Greek letter pi, my friends, is denoting the rate of inflation. The item in the square bracket, what you are going to observe is, has been raised to the power of 1 because we are finding out the expected exchange rate one period ahead. Also, you are going to recall from absolute purchasing power parity that the ratio of price levels in the country between the countries is simply equal to the current exchange rate, and that is what we have written here in the second equation. Instead of writing this ratio of prices between countries, we have simply written here the current exchange rate E0, and that has been written in the format of units of foreign currency per unit of domestic currency, and the second term here has remained unchanged. Now, if you are finding out the expected exchange rate n periods ahead, my friends, then what you are going to do is everything else in this equation is going to remain the same. The only thing that is changing here is that you are raising the item in the square brackets to the power of n, and n could be anything. It could be 2 periods ahead, it could be 3 periods ahead, it could be 4 periods ahead. Let us take a few numbers and make a small calculation. Let us assume that the current rate of exchange E0 between the Mexican pesos and US dollars is 15 pesos to a dollar. The estimate of US inflation is known 1%, and the estimate of Mexican inflation is also available, which is equal to 20%. Let us use this equation, this one here, to find out the expected exchange rate one period ahead. What we are going to do is, for writing a number for the current exchange rate, we are going to use this number 15. So let me write here 15, and then we are going to multiply this 15 by the ratio between the change in inflation rates in two countries. So I'm starting a square bracket, and inside I'm starting a small bracket, then I'm writing 1 plus, now I have to write down the inflation rate, and the question is, which inflation rate should I write? Should I write down the US inflation rate or the Mexican inflation rate? And that can be found out by looking at the order of the currencies in our current exchange rate. The current exchange rate, my friends, is denoted as pesos per dollar. So the Mexican currency is appearing first, and therefore what we should do is that we should write the Mexican inflation rate first. So I'm going to write here 0.20 and closing the bracket. Then I'm going to divide this thing by 1 plus the US inflation rate, which is 1%. So I'm going to write 0.01, closing the small bracket, closing the square bracket, and I could raise this thing to the power of 1 or just leave it like that, because raising to the power of 1 would give me just the same thing. So if I carry out this calculation now, what I'm going to find is that my result is going to be 17.8218. And now what is this 17.8218? Is it the pesos or the dollars? Now look back at your exchange rate quotation. It has been expressed in pesos per dollars. So let's write here pesos per dollar. So the current, so the expected exchange rate 1 period ahead, my friends, is 17.8218 pesos per dollar, and that demonstrates to you that there is an inverse relationship between the price levels and the value of the currency. If you compare the inflation rates in two countries, you will find that the Mexican inflation rate is higher as compared to the US inflation rate. That is why the Mexican currency is supposed to depreciate and the US currency is supposed to appreciate, and that is what we are seeing here. The Mexican currency is depreciating from 15 to 17.8218. That automatically means that the US dollar is appreciating vis-a-vis the Mexican peso. We can repeat this calculation, my friends, for finding out the expected exchange rate 2 periods ahead, and we are going to assume that the inflation estimates are going to remain unchanged. Of course, if the inflation estimates changed, then we would have accommodated that change here as well. So since we have the same estimates, let's write 15, and then what we are going to do is inside the square bracket we are going to write this whole thing one more time. So let me just copy this whole thing and write it. Copy, and let me paste it at this place. And then we have to be careful because we are finding out the expected exchange rate at the end of 2 periods now. So we have to raise this item inside the square brackets to the power of 2. And when we do that and carry out our calculation, what we are going to find is that we have an exchange rate of 21.1744 pesos to a dollar. And what we observe is that if the Mexican inflation continues to be higher than the US inflation rate, then as the time elapses, the Mexican currency or the pesos are going to continue to depreciate further, and the US dollar vis-a-vis the Mexican peso is going to continue its journey of appreciation. To end this screencast, my friends, let us see if the purchasing power parity holds true empirically or not. Well, of course, there are going to be some problems, as you might have anticipated, and the first problem is that the notion of purchasing power parity is based on the fact that there are identical products between countries, and that is why we could find out a ratio of prices like this here. But as we all know that goods are not identical between the countries. For instance, if we talk about cars, they may differ not only between countries but within the country as well. We have different brands of cars, isn't it? So if that assumption is not met with, there is going to be a problem with purchasing power parity theory. Number 2, my friends, many of the goods and services are not traded. For example, haircut salons, haircut services are not tradable across countries. For example, tailoring services are not tradable across national frontiers usually. So as long as goods and services are not tradable, it is not possible to find out a ratio between the prices of products between the countries, and then purchasing power parity cannot hold, or simply we cannot find out an estimate of exchange rates on the basis of purchasing power parity. Number 3, my friends, purchasing power parity also assumes a free flow of capital and goods between countries, and we know that for many reasons this may not be the case. And if there is a problem with a free flow of capital and goods between countries, then purchasing power parity is going to break down to that extent. Therefore, my friends, as long as the assumptions on which this theory of purchasing power parity is based, as long as these assumptions are violated, the parity condition may not hold true. In other words, it holds true only as much as the assumptions are satisfied. What has happened empirically is that many researchers have noted that purchasing power parity holds more true in the long run than in the short run. So in spite of various questions that may arise about the applicability of purchasing power parity, it nevertheless tells us about an important relationship between two macroeconomic variables, that is inflation and exchange rates. Thank you very much, my friends, for watching. Bye-bye.